My 3 children threw me out on a freezing, snowy night. Get out, my son shouted. You should have died 15 years ago. I wandered until I found an abandoned shipyard. Inside, behind metal lockers, I discovered a hidden room filled with rescue logs, letters, and cassette tapes from a shipwreck rescue team. Then I saw the photographs. Every picture showed me young standing beside rescue boats and survivors, but I couldn't remember any of it. That night I decided to uncover the truth and reclaim my lost past. This story starts with family, but it won't end the way you expect. Before we dive in, leave me a comment. Have you ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Your perspective might help someone else feel less alone. Quick note, some details are fictionalized for storytelling. The lesson it carries is what truly matters. At 68, I had $14 in my pocket, a black garbage bag with 3 shirts, and 3 children who believed I'd be better off dead. The living room was warm. Brandon's house always ran hot in December, radiators clanking. My son sat across from me at the dining table, 42 years old and sharp in his business suit, even at 8 at night. He slid papers across the polished wood with the confidence of a man who'd already won. Sign the papers, Dad. The nursing home needs them by Friday. I looked at the forms. Words swam: admission, consent, transfer of property. Claire sat to my left, 39 and hollow-eyed in her nurse's scrubs from the hospital shift she'd just finished. She wouldn't meet my gaze. Astrid leaned against the far wall, 34, with her phone in hand. What land are you talking about? I asked. I don't own any land. Brandon's jaw tightened. He tapped the second document. The property by the bay. Don't play stupid. I'm not playing anything. I worked the docks for 40 years. Where would I get property? Claire shifted. Brandon, maybe nothing. He cut her off. Dad, you're not well. The nursing home is good, clean. I don't need a nursing home. You can't remember what you had for breakfast? I remember you were 10 when you broke your arm falling off the dock. I remember Claire cried for 3 hours when her goldfish died. Don't tell me what I can't remember. The radiator clanked. Snow hit the windows. Astrid's phone buzzed. Brandon stood, scraping his chair back. This house isn't a place to house a worthless old man who can't remember his own name. I know my name. Then sign the papers. I looked at the forms again. Nursing home admission, property transfer, Bayfront location, block 47. None of it made sense. But the way Brandon stared at me, hungry, tired, desperate, that made sense. He needed something, and I was in his way. I set the pen down. No. Brandon grabbed my garbage bag from beside the couch and hurled it onto the front porch. The door was already open. Snow swirled in cold air, cutting through the room. Then get out. I stood slowly. My knees hurt. They always hurt in winter-old injuries from years on the water. Claire made a sound like a wounded animal, but didn't move. You don't know what you're doing, I said. Brandon pointed at the door. You have until morning to figure out where you're going. Don't come back here. I walked past him. The porch was ice under my boots. I picked up the garbage bag, wet and heavy. Behind me, the warm yellow light from Brandon's house looked like a painting from a different life. Claire appeared in the doorway, wrapped in her cardigan. I'm sorry, she whispered. Brandon pulled her back inside. The door slammed. I'd survived foster homes where they locked the food cabinets. I'd survived 3 tours in the merchant marine, through storms that split cargo ships in half. I'd survived 42 years of marriage and a wife's death I couldn't properly remember. But nothing prepared me for the moment my own son threw me into December snow and shut the door like I was garbage he'd finally gotten around to taking out. The cold hit different when you had nowhere to go. Wind cut through my jacket, through my shirt, down to bones that remembered better days. I started walking. My feet knew the direction, even if my mind didn't. Behind me, the porch door opened again. Astrid's voice carried across the snow. This is so hard. We tried everything. I turned. She stood on the porch steps. Phone raised, recording. Tears on her face that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. The camera light made her face glow. Put the phone down, Astrid. My followers need to understand what we're going through. How difficult this is for our family. I'm your family. I'm standing right here. She zoomed in, getting my face the garbage bag, the snow in my hair. Behind her, through the window, I could see Brandon watching, not stopping her, just watching. I looked directly at the camera, not begging, not angry, just tired. You're going to regret this, I said. Astrid lowered the phone slightly. For a second, she looked like the little girl who used to make me read the same bedtime story 5 times. Then the performance snapped back. More tears, more tragedy. "We love you, Dad. We just can't help you anymore." I turned and walked. The garbage bag was getting heavier. Snow was falling harder. The street was empty Christmas lights blinking in windows where families were warm. Across the street, behind a parked truck, something moved. A figure small, holding something that caught the streetlight. Another phone, another camera. The figure didn't move when I looked, just stood there in the dark recording. I could see the faint red light, small as a distant star. You need to understand something when you're 68 and standing in a snowstorm with nowhere to go. You stop thinking about pride and start thinking about survival. Who cares if someone's filming? Who cares if your daughter turns you into content for strangers? The cold doesn't care about your dignity. I kept walking. Behind me, Astrid went back inside. The porch light clicked off. The house went dark except for one window where Brandon stood watching me disappear into the storm. Across the street, the red light stayed on. Across the street, the red light stayed on. The figure didn't move, didn't lower the phone, just kept recording everything: Brandon's silhouette in the window, Astrid's performance, and my face when I looked into her camera without fear, without begging. Just tired. I didn't know his name then. Didn't know he'd seen everything. I just kept walking. I made it 2 blocks before Claire caught up. She appeared at the street corner, running in her nurse's scrubs, without a coat. Breath coming in white clouds. The snow was falling harder now, covering her hair, her shoulders. She looked like a ghost, trying to apologize. She didn't say anything at first, just reached into her pocket and pulled out a prescription bottle and folded bills. Her hands were shaking from cold or guilt, I couldn't tell. She shoved them into my coat pocket, quick and desperate, like someone committing a crime. "Take this. Don't tell Brandon." I looked at the bottle. Blood pressure medicine. My name on the label from 3 months ago, prescription I'd never been able to afford to refill. The bills felt thick, maybe $80, maybe more. "You know this is wrong," I said. "You know what he's doing is wrong." Claire's eyes were wet. Not crying exactly, just wet. "I can't what? Can't tell your brother he's throwing his father into the snow? Can't ask why he needs property? I don't remember owning. I'm sorry. That's not an answer." She backed away, wrapping her arms around herself. Behind her down the street, I could see the warm lights of Brandon's house. She looked back at them, then at me. "I have to go," she whispered. She turned and ran. Her scrubs were already covered in snow by the time she reached the corner. She didn't look back. I stood there holding my garbage bag and feeling the weight of the medicine bottle in my pocket. $80. A guilty conscience measured in 20s. It wouldn't fix anything, but it would keep me alive a few more days. I started walking. I didn't know where I was going. My mind was empty of destinations, empty of plans. Just cold and tired and moving because standing still meant freezing. But my feet knew something I didn't. They turned south at the intersection without me deciding. They followed a street I didn't recognize past houses I'd never seen. The snow kept falling. Christmas lights blinked in windows. A dog barked somewhere. My feet kept walking. The smell hit me 3 blocks later. Salt water, bay smell. That particular combination of ocean and decay and wet wood that meant the waterfront was close. Something in my chest tightened. Not recognition exactly. Something older than memory. My feet turned left at a corner I didn't remember. Walked past a closed diner and a boarded-up marine supply shop. The street sloped down. The bay smell got stronger. I'd worked the docks for 40 years. I knew what salt water smelled like, but this was different. This was specific. This was coming home to something I couldn't remember leaving. How many miles can a man walk when he has nowhere to go? How many times had I walked these same streets toward the same bay without remembering any of them? My feet knew. They'd walked this route before, maybe hundreds of times. They remembered the broken sidewalk square at the corner, the dip in the road where water pooled, the place where the streetlights ended and darkness began. The houses stopped. Empty lots opened up on both sides, covered in snow and dead grass. Ahead I could hear water moving. Not waves exactly. The quiet lap of bay water against pilings. I kept walking. The building appeared out of the darkness like something from a dream I'd forgotten having. Wooden walls weathered gray by decades of salt wind. Metal roof rusted in patches sagging in the middle. Windows dark and empty. The whole structure leaned slightly toward the water like it was tired of standing. I stopped. I didn't know this place. I'd never seen it before. But my feet had walked directly to it, without hesitation, without wrong turns like they'd done it 1,000 times. The sign above the door was too faded to read in the darkness. Just ghost letters, white paint peeling away from wood. I should have kept walking. Should have found a shelter, a church somewhere warm. Instead, I walked toward the side door. My hand reached out, not to the handle, to a loose board beside the frame. The board moved. Behind it, my fingers found a latch. I froze. How did I know that was there? How did my hand move without me thinking about it? The latch clicked. The door shifted in its frame. The smell that came out was immediate and overwhelming. Old wood and engine oil and something else I couldn't name but knew in my bones. Not stranger smell. Not danger smell. Something else. Home smell. I pulled the door open. Darkness inside, complete and total. But the smell got stronger. Engine oil and salt water and years of something I couldn't remember, but my lungs recognized. Behind me, the snow kept falling on a town that had forgotten I existed. My children thought I was senile, homeless, gone. They didn't know about this place. They didn't know my feet could walk here in the dark. They didn't know my hand could find a latch hidden behind a loose board. 68 years old, $14 in my pocket, and standing at a door my hand could open but my mind couldn't remember. This was either the end of something or the beginning. I stepped inside. The darkness swallowed me. The door swung shut behind me, muffling the sound of snow and wind. Inside I could hear water lapping against pilings underneath the floor. Could hear the building creak in the wind. Could smell decades of work and salt and something else my memory couldn't quite catch. I set the garbage bag down, felt along the wall. My hand found a light switch exactly where it expected to find one. I flipped it. Nothing happened. No power? Of course no power. This place had been abandoned for years, maybe decades. But my hand had known where the switch was. I stood in the darkness and tried to understand what was happening. Brandon wanted me to sign over property by the bay. My feet had walked me directly to a building by the bay. My hand had opened a door I didn't remember. Somewhere in this darkness answers were waiting. Somewhere in this building that smelled like home my life was hiding from me. I waited for my eyes to adjust. They didn't. The darkness inside the shipyard was absolute thick as water, but something about standing in this cold, empty building felt less lonely than sitting in Brandon's warm living room had been. I pulled out my phone. 8% battery. The flashlight turned the darkness, blue-white, harsh, and mechanical. The beam caught concrete floor, exposed wooden beams, overhead walls of old brick, stained with water damage and salt air. The space was huge, 50 feet wide, maybe more, extending back into shadows the phone couldn't reach. The smell was stronger now. Engine oil, definitely. Old wood and metal. Salt water coming up through cracks in the floor where bay water moved underneath. And something else. Something like memory if memory had a smell. I set my garbage bag down and started clearing a corner. Broken boards, rusted chains, a life jacket so rotted it fell apart when I touched it. Underneath the debris, the floor was solid, dirty but sound. This place had been forgotten but not destroyed, just waiting. I worked slowly, my breath coming out in white clouds. The cold here was different from outside, cleaner somehow, honest. No one was pretending to care while throwing you out. No one was recording your misery for strangers. Just cold and dark and silent. My phone buzzed. 6%. I swept the corner clear with my boot-testing floorboards as I went. Most were solid. One near the wall gave slightly under my weight. I knelt down, pressed harder. The board shifted. I worked my fingers under the edge and lifted. The board came up easily, like someone had loosened the nails on purpose. Underneath a hollow space between joists. And inside that space, something square and metal. A tin box. I pulled it out. Dust fell away, but the box itself was intact. No rust. The lid was sealed tight with old tape. I set it on the floor and peeled the tape away. It came off in brittle strips. The lid opened. Inside, a thick candle barely used, a small box of matches, and a piece of paper folded once covered in handwriting. I knew that handwriting. I didn't know how I knew it, didn't know whose it was, but my hands recognized the loops and slants the way they'd recognized the door latch outside. My body was remembering things my brain had locked away. I unfolded the paper. The phone flashlight was dimming. 3%. I read fast. The note said, "If you find this box, I know you've made it home." That was all. Just one sentence in handwriting I knew but couldn't name. My phone went dark, battery dead. The darkness crashed back in heavier than before. I sat there holding the paper, feeling the weight of words written by someone who'd known I would come back to a place I didn't remember leaving. I reached into the tin box, found the matches, struck one. The flame was small and bright and immediate. I touched it to the candle wick. The wick caught, flared, settled into steady flame. The light was warmer than the phone had been, softer. It filled the corner with orange glow and pushed shadows back like living things retreating. I looked at the note again in candlelight. The handwriting belonged to Rose, my wife Rose. Dead 14 years, I knew that the way you know the weight of grief even when you can't remember the funeral. But her handwriting on that note was more alive than anything in Brandon's house. More real than Astrid's fake tears or Claire's guilty apology or Brandon's hungry stare at papers I wouldn't sign. Rose had left this box. Rose had known I would find it. Rose had known I would come home. But how had she known? I stood holding the candle. The flame was strong. Too strong for a candle that had been sealed in a tin box for years. The wax was fresh, somehow white and clean, burning steady without smoke. I walked toward the center of the bay candle, held high. The light reached farther than it should have. It caught the far wall, brick, stained old, and against that wall 6 tall metal cabinets stood in a row. Lockers, maybe. Storage. Something about them was wrong. I moved closer. The candlelight threw my shadow long across the floor, stretching toward the cabinets. And in that shadow, I saw it. The wall behind the cabinets wasn't brick. It was wood. Lighter color, different texture, newer grain. I walked right up to the cabinets, held the candle close. The gap between 2 lockers showed it clearly. Someone had built a wooden wall behind these cabinets, had sealed off part of the building, had hidden it behind furniture. I set the candle on the floor and grabbed the nearest locker. Tried to pull it away from the wall. It barely budged. Too heavy. But it moved an inch, and through the gap I could see the wooden wall more clearly. Fresh wood, maybe 10 years old, maybe 15. How does a dead woman leave you exactly what you need, in exactly the place you'll look for it? How does she know you're coming home before you do? I picked up the candle and examined the cabinet row. 6 lockers each, one 6 feet tall, bolted to the floor. Someone had gone to serious effort to hide that wall, to seal off whatever was behind it. The candle flame bent sideways just for a second. Air movement coming from behind the wooden wall. Not a wall. A door. I walked along the row of cabinets looking for gaps, looking for hinges, looking for any sign of how to move them. The last cabinet on the right had a different base, less secure. I could see where someone had tried to bolt it down, but the concrete had crumbled. I set the candle safely away and put my shoulder against that last cabinet. Pushed. It scraped forward an inch. Another inch. The sound was loud in the empty building, metal on concrete echoing off brick walls and water underneath. One more push, and the gap was wide enough to see that the wooden wall behind had a seam, a vertical line, a door frame, and next to that seam at shoulder height, a simple latch. I stopped pushing, stood there breathing hard, looking at what Rose had hidden behind 6 metal cabinets in a building my children didn't know existed. A sealed room, a secret space. Something she'd built and locked away and left for me to find when I finally made it home. The candle kept burning. The flame didn't waver. Behind the wooden door in that hidden room, something was waiting. I didn't sleep. Just sat watching the candle burn down, staring at the wooden door behind those cabinets, waiting for morning. When dawn came through cracked windows, it turned the shipyard from a cave into something else. The concrete floor looked solid in daylight. The beams overhead showed their age, but not their weakness. And those 6 metal cabinets still stood guard, hiding whatever Rose had sealed away. I grabbed the loose floorboard and used it as a lever, wedged it behind the last cabinet and pushed. Metal scraped concrete. The cabinet moved 6 inches, then a foot. The wooden wall behind was visible now. New wood, maybe 15 years old. The door frame was clean, professional. Someone had built this, deliberately sealed this room, and wanted it to stay hidden, or wanted it found by the right person. I put my shoulder against the thin paneling and pushed. The wood cracked. Pushed again. It gave way clean. A false wall more than a real one. The door behind swung inward on hinges that barely squeaked. The room beyond was small, maybe 10 feet square, no windows, but sealed so tight that dust hadn't gotten in, weather hadn't touched it. A time capsule. I stepped inside. A shelf held old walkie-talkies. Black plastic cases, scratched but intact. Laminated bay maps tacked the wall above, marked with handwritten coordinates in red. A narrow desk held 3 ring binders, duty logs, pages filled with dates and times and names. Orange life vests hung on hooks. In the corner, a marine radio, old style. And on the opposite wall, a framed photograph. 6 people in Coast Guard-style uniforms, orange and black. Standing in front of this building back when the paint was fresh. 3 men, 3 women, smiling like they'd just finished something worth smiling about. Front and center stood a younger version of me, 40 years younger, hair dark instead of gray. But my face, undeniably mine, wearing a captain's uniform with a name patch over the left pocket, R. Long Captain. Under the photo, Patterson, Shipyard Maritime Rescue Team, 2007. I stood there for a long time, just looking, trying to feel something, recognition, memory connection, anything. Nothing came. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from looking at your own photograph and feeling nothing. Not the weather that day, not the people standing beside you, not the pride you must have felt wearing that uniform, just a stranger's face that happened to match yours. I commanded this team, I said, aloud. My voice sounded wrong. I wore that uniform, but saying it didn't make me remember it. Footsteps outside, heavy boots on concrete, coming closer. A man walked in carrying 2 paper coffee cups and a canvas tool bag. Maybe 60, lean and weathered, wearing coveralls with a patch that said Russell Marine Supply. Work boots caked with salt stains. He stopped when he saw me, stared, just stood there holding the coffee, staring at my face with an expression I couldn't read. 10 full seconds of silence. Then he walked forward, set 1 coffee cup on the floor near me, and dropped the tool bag beside it. "Looks like you could use some tools," he said quietly. "And coffee. Who are you?" "Ray Kowalski. I run the marine supply shop across the street." "How did you know I was here?" He didn't answer, just looked around the shipyard, his eyes going to the gap in the cabinets. The broken wood, the open door. "You found it," he said. Not a question, a statement. "Found what? What Rose left for you?" My chest tightened. "You knew Rose?" Ray looked at me for another long moment. Then he picked up his coffee and turned toward the door. "Everyone knew Rose," he said. He walked toward the exit, slow, like he was giving me time to ask more questions, but I didn't know what to ask. He reached the door, paused, turned halfway back. "What are you still standing there staring at Cap?" He said it casual, like it was nothing, like a name he'd called me 1,000 times before. Then he walked out. I stood there holding the coffee he'd brought, hot, fresh, still steaming. Cap, short for captain. The title on the uniform in the photograph. The rank I'd held on a rescue team I didn't remember commanding. Why would a stranger from the marine supply shop know a nickname I didn't remember having? Why would he say it like a fact and walk away like a test? I went back to the radio room, looked at the photograph again. R. Long Captain. The other 5 people stood beside me, but I couldn't name a single one. Ray Kowalski had called me Cap, not asked if I remembered, not explained, just used the name like it still fit. He knew who I was. He knew what this place was, and he was waiting for me to remember. I picked up one of the 3 ring binders from the desk. Duty logs. The first page was dated January 2003. The handwriting was mine. I recognized it the same way I'd recognized Rose's. January 15th, 2003. Responded to distress call. 2 adults, 3 children boat taking water. All rescued. 0 casualties. Page after page, year after year, rescues and coordinates and lives saved, all in my handwriting, all signed R. Long Captain. I'd saved people, for years, from these waters, and I didn't remember any of it. The coffee was getting cold. Outside across the street, Ray Kowalski was probably watching, waiting, knowing exactly who I'd been and letting me figure it out myself. Cap. The name felt right, even though I couldn't remember earning it. I spent the morning reading duty logs, page after page of rescues I couldn't remember, lives I'd saved without knowing I'd saved them. By afternoon, my head hurt from trying to force memories that wouldn't come. Then the kid showed up. He appeared in the doorway around 2 o'clock, carrying a vintage maritime radio and a backpack full of tools. 16, skinny, wearing a jacket too thin for December. I recognized him immediately, the teenager who'd filmed everything from across the street that first night, the one with the phone and the red recording light. He set the radio down carefully on the concrete floor, Uncle Ray said you might need help with the equipment, he said. I'm Sammy Russell. I'm good with radios. Your uncle talks about me. He talks around you. Says the old shipyard needs work. Says someone's finally going to fix it. Sammy picked up his backpack. I brought tools. We worked in the radio room. Sammy handled the modern circuitry with confidence. But when it came to the vacuum tubes and analog systems, my hands took over. I didn't think about what to do. My fingers just knew which tubes to test, which connections to check, which parts could be salvaged, and which needed replacing. Sammy watched me work with quiet fascination. You've done this before, he said. Not a question. I don't remember doing it, but your hands do. He was right. My hands remembered. They moved with certainty through repairs my brain couldn't explain. 2 hours passed. The radio started coming together. Sammy worked on the power supply while I rebuilt the receiver. The work felt right, familiar, like coming home to a language you'd forgotten you spoke. There, Sammy said finally. Try it. I flipped the power switch. The radio hummed, warmed up. The speaker crackled with static. The sound hit me like a fist. Pain exploded behind my eyes. The room tilted. I grabbed the table edge. Mr. Long, are you okay? But I wasn't in the room anymore. Red lights strobing, emergency lights, dark water below black as oil moving fast, children's voices crying for help, the weight of rescue rope in my hands, rough fiber cutting into palms, salt water in my mouth, in my lungs, cold, so cold the breath left you. And through it all, through the red lights and black water and screaming my own voice, younger, stronger, shouting coordinates through a radio exactly like this one. Hold on, we're coming. North Channel, 200 yards. Hold on. The memory hit like drowning, not gentle, like remembering where you left your keys, but violent. Like your lungs suddenly remembering they'd once been full of black salt water, and a younger man's determination to save people who were screaming. Mr. Long. The radio room snapped back. I was gripping the table so hard my knuckles were white. Sammy stood beside me, hand hovering near the power switch. Should I turn it off? I shook my head. The pain was fading. The memory was already slipping away like water through fingers, but I needed more, needed to remember. Leave it on, I said. I need to hear it. The static kept crackling. Nothing but white noise, but underneath I could almost hear voices, almost hear the emergency calls and coordinates, and the sound of my own voice saving people I'd forgotten. Sammy didn't ask questions, just stood there while I caught my breath. Smart kid. Sunset light came through the shipyard door, orange and gold cutting through the dust. A shadow moved in that light. Someone walking slowly, carefully. An old woman appeared in the doorway. 81, maybe, older, leaning on a wooden cane with a carved handle. She wore a long wool coat and a scarf face lined with decades of weather and worry. But her eyes were sharp, clear. She saw me standing in the radio room doorway. She stopped. She started crying, not loud, just tears running down weathered cheeks, while she stared at me like I was a ghost she'd been waiting for. Finally, she whispered, finally the bay has brought you back. I stood there. Do I know you? She walked forward slowly, cane tapping concrete. Sammy moved aside to give her space. She came right up to me close enough I could see every line in her face, every year of age. Vera Patterson, she said. Harold's wife? Was his wife? He passed 6 years ago. The name meant nothing. Harold, Patterson, blank spaces where memory should be. He said you'd come back, Vera continued. Said the bay always brings its children home eventually. I don't understand. You will. She looked past me into the radio room, saw the photograph on the wall, the duty logs, the equipment Sammy and I had been repairing. You're starting to remember. I can see it in your face. That's good. That's what Rose wanted. Everyone keeps mentioning Rose like I should. You will, Vera repeated firmly. But not all at once. The memory needs to come back slow. Safe. She turned to leave, then paused, placed one hand on my shoulder. Her grip was surprisingly strong. There's a metal box under the radio table, she said. Gray metal, locked. Don't open it yet. I glanced back into the radio room. Under the table, barely visible in shadow, I could see the corner of something gray. How does an 81-year-old woman I've never met know there's a metal box under a table I only found this morning? How does she know I'm not ready for something I don't remember wanting? Why not? I asked. Because it's not the right time. You're not ready. Vera squeezed my shoulder once. Harold made me promise. Don't rush this. Let the bay give you back to yourself at the right pace. She walked away into the sunset light cane tapping, leaving me and Sammy standing in the shipyard with more questions than answers. The radio kept humming, static filling the space. Sammy looked at me. You going to listen to her? I walked back into the radio room. Knelt down. Under the table, pushed back against the wall, sat a gray metal box about the size of a shoebox. No rust, intact. A simple combination lock on the front. Vera had told me not to open it, which meant she knew what was inside, which meant she knew who I was before I walked into this building. I reached out, pulled the box toward me, set it on the table. The lock was old but solid. Tomorrow, I said. Tomorrow I'll deal with this. But I already knew I was lying. I'd deal with it tonight. I spent the rest of that day reading articles Sammy found. Each one said the same thing Captain Ralph Long. Hero missing, presumed dead. Mayor Keene's name appeared in 3 of them, always with the same careful language about investigations and accountability. By day 4, I stopped reading and started searching the shipyard itself. I found Rose's second message behind the navigation chart. I'd been cleaning the radio room, checking for water damage. The laminated bay map on the wall was old corners peeling away from the brick. I reached up to remove it, see what was underneath. A manila envelope fell out, taped flat against the brick where no one would find it unless they took the map down. Rose's handwriting across the front, "Honey, don't be afraid. I'm here." My chest tightened. I opened the envelope. Inside, a simple gold wedding band. My wedding band. The one I thought I'd lost years ago in some way I couldn't remember. I picked it up, warm from being against the brick catching afternoon light. Inside the band engraved R+R 1981. I slid it onto my left hand. 4th finger. It fit perfectly. The weight felt like coming home. A small note was folded in the envelope. Rose's handwriting again. "You'll need this when you remember who you are." I sat down on the radio room floor, holding that ring, like it was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting. Rose had hidden it. Rose had known I'd come back. Rose had known I'd take down this map, eventually searching, trying to understand. She'd been dead 14 years when she saved my life by hiding a ring I didn't remember losing in a room I didn't remember building. And somehow that made more sense than my son standing in front of me the next morning, talking about land transfers like I was already in the ground. Brandon arrived at 9 o'clock. I was in the main bay trying to repair a water-damaged section of floor. I heard the door open, looked up. Brandon walked in wearing a suit. Business suit, like he was closing a deal. Claire followed behind him, wrapped in her coat. Astrid came last, phone already out, ready to record. Brandon carried a leather folder. "We need to talk," he said. No greeting, no asking how I was surviving in a building with no heat. I stood up. "About what?" "About this." He set the folder on an old workbench, opened it. Papers inside. Official-looking documents with signatures and seals. "The land transfer needs your signature by Friday, or the deal falls through." "What land?" His jaw tightened. "Don't play games, Dad." "I'm not playing anything. What land are you talking about?" Brandon pulled out the top document. A property survey, aerial photograph of bayfront property, with boundaries marked in red. 14 acres, the shipyard, the dock, all of it. "This land," Brandon said. 14 acres of bayfront property. This property. The shipyard, the dock, everything. I looked at the survey, at the red lines defining something I didn't remember owning. "I don't understand." "You don't need to understand." Brandon pulled out more papers. Development proposals, sales contracts. "You just need to sign." "I'm not signing anything until I understand what this is." Brandon's face went red. "You don't need to know what should have belonged to me in the first place." The words hung in the cold air. Claire made a small sound. Astrid's phone was still recording. "Should have belonged to you," I repeated slowly. "What are you talking about?" Brandon spread the documents across the workbench, pointed at signature lines. "This land, the shipyard, all of it was supposed to transfer to us after you died. But I didn't die. Everyone thought you did, the court declared it. We processed the papers. The inheritance was," he stopped, caught himself. But I'd heard enough. Claire stood near the radio room entrance, staring at the open door. Her expression was anxious, worried. Her eyes moved from the radio room to my left hand where Rose's ring now sat. She'd seen it. She knew I'd found something. "You processed papers," I said quietly. "You inherited this property when I was declared dead." Brandon didn't answer. "And now I'm alive, and you want me to sign it over anyway." The development deal is worth. He caught himself again. It doesn't matter what it's worth. It's the right thing to do. You can't run a shipyard. You can barely remember your own name. Claire spoke up, quiet but clear. Brandon, maybe we should... Shut up, Claire. She flinched, looked at the floor. What do you call a man who throws his father out in the snow and then shows up 5 days later with legal papers, demanding property rights? You call him Brandon. You call him my son. Astrid kept filming. I looked directly at her phone. Put it down, I said. She didn't move. Astrid, put the phone down. Brandon grabbed the phone from her hand, shoved it in his pocket. We're leaving. He gathered the papers, slammed the folder shut, turned toward the door, stopped, turned back. You have until Friday to sign, he said, each word deliberate, cold. After that, I'll contest your claim to this property. You've been legally dead for 15 years. The court might have questions about why you suddenly reappeared, right when this land became valuable. He walked out. Astrid followed. Claire stayed, stood there looking at me, at the ring on my finger, at the radio room behind me where Rose had hidden so much. You're finding things, she said quietly. Not a question, a statement. Yes, Mom left them for you. You knew. Claire's eyes filled with tears. She said you'd come back someday, said you'd need help remembering. She made me promise not to tell Brandon. Wait, because Brandon... She stopped, looked toward the door where her brother had just left. Because she knew what he'd do if he found out you were alive. Claire walked toward the door, paused. The ring, she said. She gave it to me before she died, told me where to hide it, said you'd know where to look. She left before I could ask more questions. I stood alone in the shipyard, holding the folder Brandon had forgotten, opened it, read the development proposal. 14 acres, bayfront property, valued at $4 million. My son wanted to sell it, had already made arrangements, just needed one signature from a father he thought was safely dead. Brandon called my cell an hour after he left the shipyard. The phone Claire had given me that first night. His voice was cold, controlled. Meet me at the old pier. We need to finish this conversation. I went because I was tired of running from conversations I couldn't remember starting. The pier stretched out over dark water. December afternoon turning to evening sun low and red. Brandon stood at the end with his back to shore, the kind of position you choose when you want to make sure nobody overhears what you're about to say. My boots echoed on old wood as I walked toward him. The pier swayed slightly in the current. Water moved beneath black and cold smelling of salt and decay. Brandon turned when I was 10 feet away. His face was twisted with something beyond anger, frustration, desperation, the look of a man watching money slip away. You're standing in the way of a development deal worth over $2 million because you're too senile to understand what you don't even own, he said. No greeting, no preamble, just accusation. I understand more than you think, I said. You don't know what you're doing, Brandon. Don't tell me what I don't know. You can't even remember your own name half the time. I remember enough. You remember nothing? His voice rose. You showed up out of nowhere after 15 years. 15 years, Dad. We buried you. We mourned you. We moved on. And now you come back and act like you have any right to what? To property that's apparently mine, to a life you thought was safely dead. Brandon stepped closer. His hands were clenched into fists. Everything is about money when you don't have any, he said. And you don't have anything. No job, no home, no memory. You're worthless. I'd heard worse, said by better men. Then why do you need my signature? He didn't answer. Just stared at me with eyes that looked like mine but held nothing I recognized. You want to be homeless again? He said finally. Fine, start with the water. He shoved me, both hands against my chest. Hard. I fell backward off the pier. The water hit like concrete. Cold. Shock. Cold. December bay, water that steals breath and thought. I went under darkness, closing over my head, salt water in my mouth, in my nose. There's a difference between falling and being pushed. Falling is an accident, gravity, and bad luck. But being pushed by your own son is a choice he makes with his hands, and you feel that choice in the water with you colder than the bay. Underwater, something broke open. Not memory exactly, feeling, sensation, terror that didn't belong to this moment, but came flooding in anyway. Children screaming, red emergency lights strobing through darkness, the weight of rescue rope in my hands, rough fiber-burning palms, cold water filling lungs, pulling hard against current. Someone's hand grabbing mine. Small hand. Child's hand. The memory wave crashed through me like I was drowning once before. I'd been here before, in black water, in cold that stopped breath, pulling people out, saving them, saving them. My body moved. Not my mind, my body. Legs kicked in pattern I didn't know I knew. Arms pulled in strokes that felt automatic, professional. Head turned for breath at exact right angle. Rescue swimmer technique for cold water breathing pattern to prevent hyperventilation, body position to conserve heat. I surfaced 20 feet from the pier. Gasped air. Salt water burned my throat but tasted familiar somehow. Like I'd swallowed this bay before and lived. My arms kept moving. Not panicked thrashing. Controlled strokes. Angle toward shore against current. Steady breathing despite the cold. Listen when your body saves your life using skills. You don't remember learning. You start to understand that whoever you forgot being was stronger and smarter and more capable than whoever you've been pretending to be. I swam 50 yards to shore. My body knew exactly how. Knew the optimal stroke rate for cold water. Knew how to breathe. Knew how to angle against current. Coast Guard rescue swimmer technique. I pulled myself onto rocky shore water pouring off me. My hands found grips in stones without searching. My body moved like it had done this 1,000 times, which apparently it had. Movement behind a storage shed caught my eye. Sammy stepped out, phone raised. He'd been filming. Farther back near the parking area, Astrid stood frozen. Her phone was in her hand, but down at her side. She wasn't filming, just watching. Her face was pale. On the pier, Brandon stood at the rail looking down at the empty water where I'd gone under. He hadn't seen me surface, hadn't seen me swim to shore. Sammy lowered his phone slowly, looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I think so. You swim like that often." I looked at my hands, at the water dripping from my clothes, at the way my body had moved without permission, without thought. "I don't know," I said. "I don't remember." But my body remembered. My muscles remembered. My lungs remembered how to breathe in cold water, how to move efficiently, how to save yourself when someone pushes you off a pier into black water. Sammy glanced at his phone, at whatever he'd captured. "Got the whole thing," he said. "Brandon pushing you. The fall. Everything. And the swim," he nodded. "Especially the swim. You moved like—" He stopped. "You moved like the captain in those old photos. Exact same technique." On the pier, Brandon had spotted me on shore. His face went white. He started walking back toward land, fast, almost running. Astrid hadn't moved, just stood there staring at me like I was a ghost that had climbed out of water that should have killed me. Sammy tucked his phone away carefully. "Uncle Ray needs to see this," he said. I was shaking. Not from cold exactly. From something deeper. The memory wave was fading, but it had left something behind. A crack in the wall, a door opening. I'd been in that water before. Not this water specifically, but water like it. Cold and black and full of people who needed pulling out. My body had saved me using skills my mind had completely forgotten. The question was how many other people had those skills saved before I lost them. Ray's hands grabbed my arms and hauled me fully out of the water onto concrete. For a 63-year-old shopkeeper, he had surprising strength, but when I looked up at his face, I understood why. His eyes were red, wet. He was staring at me like he was seeing a ghost. "You're okay," he said, not a question, a statement to himself. "You're okay." Sammy ran up with a jacket from his truck. Ray wrapped it around my shoulders, his hands shaking. "I'm fine," I said, "just cold." "You swam like—" Ray stopped. His voice caught. He tried again. "Only one person I know swam like that. Rescue swimmer technique, Coast Guard standard." He stopped talking, just kept staring. Sammy held up his phone. "Got everything. Brandon pushing him, the fall, all of it." Ray took the phone, watched the video. His face went through expressions I couldn't read. When he got to the part where I swam, where my body moved with professional precision through cold water, he made a sound like someone had punched him. When I asked, "What is it?" Ray handed the phone back to Sammy, looked at me for a long moment. "I watched you teach it," he said quietly. 15 years ago, that exact technique, that exact stroke pattern. "Ray, what are you saying? Who did I teach?" He shook his head. "Not yet. You're not ready yet. But soon." He pulled me to my feet, walked me back toward the shipyard. Sammy followed, quiet, understanding something I didn't. Ray looked at me the way you look at someone you thought you'd lost forever. Not with surprise, but with the kind of relief that comes after 15 years of grief. And I realized he'd been waiting for me to come back to this shipyard, The same way Vera had been waiting, the same way Rose had been waiting. By evening, I dried off by a small fire Ray built in an old barrel outside the shipyard. My clothes were still damp, but the shaking had stopped. Vera Patterson appeared in the doorway. She walked slowly with her cane, but she moved with purpose. In her free hand, she carried a small velvet pouch. "You swam today," she said. Not a question. She already knew. "How did you—" "Ray called me." She crossed to where I sat and held out the pouch. "Your body remembered. That means you're ready." I took the pouch, heavy for its size. I opened it. Inside, a brass key on a worn chain, old, tarnished, but solid. "Harold gave this to me the week before he died," Vera said. 6 years ago. He said, "Give this to the captain when he's ready, when he's remembered enough to handle what's inside." I looked at the key, then at the shipyard door behind me, at the radio room where the gray metal box sat under the table. "The box," I said. "You told me not to open it yet." "You weren't ready then?" Vera's eyes were gentle but firm. "Today you remembered how to save yourself. Your body remembered. Now you're ready for the rest." She turned and walked away, cane-tapping concrete, leaving me holding a key to a box I'd been forbidden to open. Ray and Sammy watched from near the fire. "You want us to stay?" Ray asked. I shook my head. "This is something I need to do alone." They left. The shipyard grew quiet. Just me and the fire and the key in my hand. I went to the radio room. The gray metal box sat under the table where I'd left it. I pulled it out, set it on the desk. The brass key fit the lock perfectly. One turn. Clean click. The lock opened. I lifted the lid. On top, a cassette tape in a clear plastic case. Rose's handwriting on the label. "Only listen when you've remembered a little. I love you." I set the tape aside carefully. Underneath, a manila envelope, thick, full of papers. I opened it. Newspaper clippings about the shipwreck. Investigation documents. Official forms with city seals. And at the bottom, a letter on cream-colored stationery. Letterhead at the top office of the Mayor, Fairhope, Alabama. Dated March 15, 2008. "Dear Mrs. Long, I understand you continue to make accusations regarding my son's involvement in the November 2007 vessel incident. I'm writing to strongly advise you to cease these baseless claims immediately. Your husband remains in his current condition due to the unfortunate circumstances of that rescue operation. Further investigation will not change medical realities. If you persist in making public statements about my family, there will be consequences. Your husband's care facility can be adjusted. Access to treatment can be reconsidered. Your husband will never wake up, Mrs. Long. Accept that truth and move forward quietly. Consider this your only warning. Respectfully, Mayor Vernon Keene." I read it twice. 3 times. You need to understand what it means to read a letter where a mayor threatens your wife's life to protect his son. To know she read those words hid the evidence and died a year later in a car accident that nobody questioned. The letter was dated March 2008. Rose died in August 2008, 5 months later. I set the letter down on the radio table. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. Mayor Vernon Keene, still in office, still in power, the man who declared me dead, the man who'd threatened Rose, the man whose son had been involved in the vessel incident that ended my documented life. The letter didn't name the son, just referred to my son's involvement. But Rose had known. She'd collected evidence, newspaper clippings, investigation documents, this threatening letter, and someone had killed her for it. The cassette tape sat beside the letter on the table. Rose's handwriting, Rose's voice waiting inside to tell me what she'd learned, what she'd discovered, why she'd died. I picked up the tape, turned it over in my hands. The label said, "Only listen when you've remembered a little." I'd remembered enough to know I'd been a rescue captain, enough to know I'd saved people, enough to know my body still carried training my mind had lost. Was that enough? The tape would tell me the rest. The mayor's son, the vessel incident, Rose's investigation, the truth that had gotten her killed. I looked at the old cassette player on the shelf. Still worked. We'd tested it when Sammy fixed the radio. Tomorrow I'd listen. Tomorrow I'd hear my dead wife's voice, explain who had tried to kill me, who had threatened her, and why she'd spent the last year of her life hiding evidence she knew I'd find when I finally came home. I didn't sleep. Just sat in the radio room, staring at Rose's cassette tape and the mayor's threat letter until dawn. Then I gathered everything, the folder, the clippings, the letter, and walked to Ray's shop. The marine supply shop smelled like rope and brass polish and 15 years of a man keeping vigil. When Ray looked up from behind the counter and saw the folder in my hands, he walked to the front door, locked it, and flipped the sign to close. It was 10 in the morning. Ray, whatever's in that folder, he said, we're going to need privacy. I spread the contents across his counter. Newspaper clippings about the shipwreck, investigation documents, the mayor's threatening letter on cream stationery. Ray looked at them for a long time. His hands rested on the counter-edged knuckles white. I need you to tell me about the 2007 shipwreck, I said. Everything you know. Ray didn't answer immediately. He walked to his coffee pot, poured 2 cups with hands that shook slightly, set one in front of me, took a long drink from his own. Then he started talking. November 2007, he said. His voice was quiet but steady. Charter vessel capsized in Mobile Bay during a storm. Shouldn't have been out in that weather, but it was, and it went down. He took another drink. 47 people in the water, men, women, children, black water, cold, storm waves, people screaming for help. Coast Guard was 20 minutes out. Too far. Too late. I gripped my coffee cup. I was 17 years old, Ray continued, on that boat with my parents and my little sister. When we capsized, I got separated from them in the dark. Went under. Couldn't find the surface. I was drowning. He looked at me directly. And then someone grabbed my arm. The shop was completely silent except for the sound of water lapping against the pilings underneath. The building was right on the bay, just like the shipyard, just like everything in this town. A captain came through the water like he'd been born in it, Ray said, pulling people to rescue boats one after another, systematic, professional. He got all 47 of us out, every single person. There's a kind of debt that doesn't calculate in money. When someone pulls you from Blackwater and you're 17 and drowning, that person lives in your chest for the rest of your life. And Ray had been carrying me there for 15 years. Without knowing my name or my face, just the feeling of my hand on his arm. After he got everyone out, Ray continued, the captain went back, said he needed to do a final sweep, make sure nobody was left. He went under, never came back up. Ray's voice cracked slightly. Coast Guard searched for 3 days, never found a body, eventually declared him dead. Missing, presumed drowned. They said he was a hero, said he'd saved everyone and sacrificed himself doing it. He walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a photograph in a plastic sleeve. Protected, preserved. He set it on the counter. It was the same photograph from the radio room. The rescue team. 6 people in uniforms. Younger versions of themselves smiling in front of Patterson Shipyard. Ray pointed to the captain at the front. Younger me in the captain's uniform. This is him, Ray said. The man who pulled me from the water. The man who saved 47 people and disappeared. He looked up at me. I recognized you the first day you walked into that shipyard. Your face. The way you moved. The way you stood looking at the building like your hands knew it, even if your mind didn't. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to remember, not be told. Ray's eyes were wet. If I'd told you, it would have been my story. You needed to find your own story. The one Rose left for you. I looked at the photograph, at the younger version of me who'd saved 47 people and vanished. At Ray, who'd been 17 and drowning. I don't remember any of it, I said. I know, but your body does. The way you swam yesterday, the knots you tied, the switches you found. Your body remembers everything. Ray picked up his coffee hand steadier now. After the shipwreck, after they declared the captain dead, I couldn't leave Fairhope, he said. I tried. Went to college for 1 semester in Birmingham. Couldn't focus. Couldn't sleep. Felt like I needed to be here. Near the water. Near the shipyard. He gestured around the shop. So I came back. Opened this place. Right here. Right across from Patterson Shipyard. 15 years I've been here. Never moved away. Never even thought about moving away. 15 years is a long time to wait for someone you don't remember. But it's a short time to wait for someone who saved your life. And Ray had done both, waiting for a ghost, who turned out to be a living man who'd forgotten he was a hero. I couldn't explain it, Ray said. When people asked why I stayed in Fairhope, ran a marine supply shop, when I could have done anything else, I didn't have a good answer. I just knew I needed to be here. He looked at me with 15 years of waiting in his eyes. Now I know why. My body knew you weren't dead. Knew you'd come back eventually. I was waiting for you. I just didn't know it. I set my coffee down. My hands were shaking. The man in the photograph, I said. The captain. That's who I was. That's who you are, Ray corrected. You saved my life. You saved 46 other lives. That doesn't go away just because you forgot it happened. He picked up the mayor's threatening letter from the counter, read it carefully. Someone tried to make sure you'd never remember, he said. Someone wanted you dead and buried and forgotten. He tapped the letterhead. This man is still in office, still in Fairhope, still walking around free while Rose is dead and you've been erased from existence. Ray set the letter down between us next to the photograph of younger versions of ourselves. Now you know who you are, Captain, he said quietly. The question is who tried to erase you from this world, and what are you going to do about it? I walked back to the shipyard with Ray's question echoing what was I going to do about it. First I needed to know everything, and Rose had left me the answer on a cassette tape that had been waiting 14 years to speak. I sat alone in the radio room. The tape sat on the table for an hour before I could touch it. Rose's handwriting on the label, her voice inside the plastic. 14 years of silence about to break. I picked it up, slid it into the old cassette player, pressed play. Static, then her voice. Honey, one word. It hit like a wave. I gripped the table edge. Tears came immediately. Her voice, Rose's voice, clear and steady and alive. If you're hearing this, you've remembered enough to handle what I'm about to tell you. She paused. I could hear her breathing. I've been collecting evidence for a year, ever since that night. I know what happened to you in November 2007. I know who caused the accident. I know who attacked you after. My chest was tight. Breathing hurt. You saved 47 people from Mobile Bay that night. I was so proud of you. The whole town talked about the hero captain. I could see it now. Fragments. Faces in the water. Hands reaching up. But 3 days later, you came home late. You told me you'd filed a report with the Coast Guard. Said the vessel captain had been drinking. Said there needed to be an investigation. Her voice wavered slightly. You were doing the right thing, like you always did. 14 years is long enough to forget the exact timbre of a voice. But when Rose started speaking, something in my chest remembered before my brain did. And I understood that some kinds of memory live in places deeper than the mind can erase. The next night, you didn't come home. I waited until midnight. Then I drove to the shipyard. Your truck was there, but you weren't. I found you in the water, floating face down. I stopped breathing. I pulled you out. You were breathing but unconscious. Blood on your head. Attempted murder. The tape crackled with static. You woke up 3 weeks later with no memory. The doctors said the trauma had caused permanent damage. You didn't know me? Didn't know your own name? Rose paused. When she spoke again, her voice was cold. I started investigating. Found out the vessel that capsized was owned by a private charter company. The captain that night was unlicensed. Another pause. His name was Greg Keene, Mayor Vernon Keene's son. Before she tells me what happened, after they discovered Greg's identity, I need to ask you something. Are you still with me? Because this is where everything turns. Comment your prediction using exactly 8 to 12 words. What do you think the mayor did to cover this up? Keep it short, make it sharp. Just know the next part. Include some fictionalized details, added to deepen the emotional impact, and convey the core message. What matters is the lesson behind it. The name hit me like physical force. Vernon Keene's face flooded my vision. Memory wave, night, dark pier, November 2007. I'm standing at the railing, footsteps behind me. I turn. Vernon Keene, younger, angry, smell of whiskey. You filed a report about my son. He was drunk. He killed... You're going to withdraw that report. I can't do that. His eyes go cold. He looks past me, nods. Someone behind me, blow to my skull. White light, pain, falling, water rushing up, cold, black, hands pushing me under, holding me down, lungs burning, can't breathe. Then different hands, pulling me up, Rose's hands, Rose's voice screaming my name. The memory ended. I was on the floor, gasping, hands pressed against cold concrete. The tape was still playing. Greg Keene was drunk. He was driving the charter boat that night. He caused the capsizing. Your report would have destroyed him, destroyed the mayor's family. So they came for you 3 days later. I pulled myself up, back against the wall. You tried to report him. The mayor found out. They tried to kill you. When you survived with amnesia, they declared you legally dead instead. You need to know the difference between forgetting and being erased. Forgetting is what happens when time passes. But being erased is what happens when someone takes a hammer to your skull and buries you alive inside your own broken mind. Your memory wasn't lost to age, Rose said. It was stolen, deliberately, by people who wanted you silent and gone. I understood now, all of it. I wasn't senile. I wasn't confused. I'd been attacked, left for dead. And when I survived, they'd use my amnesia to erase me from existence. My children thought I was worthless because I couldn't remember, but I couldn't remember because someone had tried to murder me for doing the right thing. The tape kept playing. They think they can bury the truth by burying you, Rose said, her voice steady now, strong. But I'm leaving you everything you need, evidence, witnesses, the paper trail they thought they destroyed. She paused. When you hear this, you'll know what to do. You always knew what to do, Ralph. You just forgot you were the kind of man who does it. Another pause, longer. Then Rose's voice again quieter. But first, I need to tell you about how I died, because, honey, it wasn't an accident. Rose's voice on the tape shifted, softer, sadder, the way it used to sound when she was about to tell me something that would hurt but needed saying anyway. And I spent the next year collecting evidence, she said. Witness statements from the shipwreck survivors, documents about Greg Keene's history of drunk driving that the mayor had buried, photos of the vessel that should never have been certified for passengers. I heard papers rustling through the tape, Rose sorting through evidence while she recorded. The mayor found out I was investigating. He sent warnings, phone calls at night, letters in the mail. The same letter you probably found by now, the one that says your husband will never wake up. Consider this your only warning. Her voice steadied. I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because 47 families deserve to know their children almost died because a powerful man covered up his son's crime. Because you deserve justice for what they did to you. The tape paused. Long silence. Then Rose's voice again, barely above a whisper. I March 2008. I'm recording this because I know what's coming. The threats have escalated. The mayor's people are following me. My car had brake trouble last week that the mechanic said looked deliberate. My hands gripped the table edge. If you're hearing this and I'm gone, it wasn't an accident. They'll call it brake failure. Maybe say I was distracted, but you'll know. And you need to know something else. I chose this. Her voice broke slightly. I chose to keep collecting evidence, knowing what they'd do. I chose truth over safety. That's who we were, Ralph. That's who we raised our children to be, even if they forgot. Rose had looked at the choice between staying silent and staying alive, and she'd picked a third option. I didn't know existed. Die loudly enough that the truth survives. You leave enough evidence that even death can't bury what you know. Don't be hurt, Rose said. Be angry. Use that anger. Use everything I've left you. And know that I loved you every day you were gone, even when you couldn't remember me. Even when you couldn't remember yourself. The tape clicked off. I sat in the radio room until the light outside turned from afternoon to evening. Rose had known. She'd recorded her own death beforehand. She'd chosen to keep collecting evidence anyway. My wife had been murdered for trying to tell the truth. I walked to Vera's house as the sun set, 3 blocks from the shipyard, small house with a porch where she sat most evenings. She was there now, sitting in her chair, looking down the street toward me like she'd been waiting. You heard the cassette, she said as I approached. Not a question. She knew. She knew they'd kill her, and she kept going anyway. Vera stood slowly leaning on her cane. She asked me to help her, and I did. Come inside. The sitting room was small, filled with photographs and memories. Harold's photo on the mantel, younger man with kind eyes, gone 6 years now. Vera pulled a folder from her desk drawer. Old, worn, handled many times. Harold and I made a choice with Rose, Vera said. I need you to understand why. She opened the folder. Inside official documents, city seals, signatures. Vera pulled out the top page, set it on the coffee table between us. A death certificate. Name, Ralph Long. Date of death, November 15th, 2007. Cause drowning, accidental witness. Signature, Vera Patterson, coroner. Signature, Dr. James Mitchell. My photograph, my face. Younger, alive, but the document declared me dead. 3 days after your attack, Vera said, Rose came to us desperate. You'd been found alive with complete amnesia. You didn't know who you were, didn't recognize her or the children. The doctors said the head trauma had destroyed your long-term memory. Vera sat down heavily in her chair. Rose was terrified. The mayor had already tried to kill you once. When word got out that you'd survived, he'd try again. And you couldn't defend yourself, couldn't even remember why someone wanted you dead. I looked at the death certificate. My name in official ink. The only way to protect you was to make you legally dead. Vera continued. Harold knew the county coroner. They'd served in the Navy together. He owed Harold a favor, so we did it. She tapped the signature line. I signed as witness. The coroner signed as official. We declared you dead by drowning in the November shipwreck. Body never recovered. Case closed. Where did I go? Rose moved you to a care facility in Birmingham. Paid cash. Used a different name. Visited you every week for 6 months while you recovered physically. But your memory never came back. You couldn't remember her. Couldn't remember anything before the attack. Vera's voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. Eventually, you got well enough to leave. Rose gave you money documents with a new identity and let you go, because keeping you close meant the mayor might find you. But if you were lost, somewhere confused with no memory, you were safe. They erased me to save me. Think about that arithmetic. You die on paper so you can keep breathing in reality, and for 15 years, you're a ghost who doesn't know he's haunting his own life. Rose knew the mayor would never stop hunting you as long as you were alive in the system, Vera said. So we made you dead. And then Rose spent the next 6 months hiding everything you'd need to come back the shipyard, the evidence, the memorial fund. I looked up. Memorial fund? Vera smiled for the first time. Sad but genuine. Rose visited every family you saved in that shipwreck, all 47, told them what really happened, told them about Greg Keene and the mayor's cover-up, told them what they'd done to you. She pulled more documents from the folder. Those families donated everything they could, built a trust in your name. A memorial fund for maritime rescue operations. Rose set it up so it would activate only when you came back. How much? Vera set the documents on the table. Enough, she said. Enough to fight back. Enough to expose the mayor. Enough to finish what Rose started. She stood, placed her hand on my shoulder. Rose knew you'd come back eventually. Knew you'd find this place. Find the evidence. Find yourself. Vera's grip tightened. She died protecting you. Now it's time to make that protection mean something. Vera pulled a thick folder from her desk. Come back to the shipyard with me. You need to see everything. We walked together through evening streets. At the shipyard, Vera spread documents across the old workbench. Papers that had been hidden for 14 years. Evidence of Rose's plan. I picked up the first document. Property deed. Patterson Shipyard. 14 acres of bayfront land. Block 47 parcel. 12A. Registered owner, Ralph Longtrust. Established June 2008. Rose transferred the shipyard into a protected trust 2 months before she died, Vera said. Made sure Brandon couldn't touch it, even if he inherited your estate. The next document was a ledger, handwritten entries, names and amounts. 47 families. Each one had donated. Some gave $100. Some gave $10,000. Donations spanning from 2003 to 2008. Total $2,847,000. Rose visited every family you saved, Vera said quietly. Told them what really happened, what the mayor did, what he tried to do to you. They wanted to help. I ran my finger down the list of names. Families I'd pulled from Blackwater, children I'd saved. They'd given everything they could spare to protect me. Who co-signed this? I asked, looking at the signature line. Vera smiled. Someone Rose trusted. Someone the mayor couldn't intimidate. Footsteps outside. The shipyard door opened. A man walked in wearing a police uniform. Late 50s, lean with sharp eyes that took in everything. Deputy Police Chief badge on his chest. Vera said it was time, he said. I've been waiting 14 years for this conversation. Vera gestured between us. Ralph, this is Lucas Reed, Deputy Police Chief. He's known this shipyard since your rescue days. Lucas extended his hand. I shook it. Lucas Reed, I repeated, looking at the trust document. You're the co-signer. June 2008, Lucas confirmed. 2 months before Rose died. She came to me with the whole story, showed me evidence, asked if I'd help protect the trust from Keene's people. Why would you do that? Lucas's face was grim. Because I knew what Keene was. I'd been watching him for years. Couldn't prove anything, couldn't touch him. But when Rose showed me what she'd collected, I knew this was how we'd finally get him. Another set of footsteps. A woman this time carrying a camera bag and notepad. Nina Brooks, Bayside Chronicle. she said, extending her hand. 34 sharp eyes, reporter's energy. Ray Kowalski called me. Said you have documents proving Keen's been stealing waterfront property for 20 years. I want that story. I looked at Vera. You called everyone. Rose's plan required allies, Vera said. She recruited them. Now they're here. Lucas pulled out his phone, showed me a schedule. Founders Day Festival, January 19th. 5 days from now. Keen's giving the keynote speech at 2 p.m. on the main stage. He's announcing the groundbreaking for Patterson Memorial Marina. Using my mother's name, I said. Using her name to steal her land, Lucas corrected. He's telling everyone it's a community gift, a memorial to the hero captain who died saving lives. Bay fog rolled through the open shipyard doors, carrying salt smell and distant foghorn. I saw my reflection in a window, not the invisible dock worker Brandon had thrown into the snow. The man Rose had trained me to be, the captain. Sammy appeared in the doorway, Ray behind him. 6 of us now, standing in Rose's shipyard, the fortress she'd built. Here's what we know, Lucas said, spreading papers on the workbench. Keen's bringing every contractor, city council member, and property developer in the county. Biggest announcement of his career. Nina clicked her pen. And we're going to make sure it's his last? How, I asked. You walk onto that stage, Nina said, with documents, with witnesses, with me filming every second. My editor runs it as front page if you go on camera. Sammy shifted. Keen will have you arrested the second you show up. Trespassing, fraud, whatever he invents. Lucas shook his head. Not if I'm standing next to him. Deputy Police Chief Trump's Mayor's Security Theater. I walked to the far wall, pulled the tarp off Rose's old desk. Untouched since 2008. Opened the top drawer. Her reading glasses? A festival schedule from 2007. The last one she'd attended. And underneath a handwritten note on her stationery. When you're ready, make them remember what we built. I held the note, looked at the 6 people Rose had assembled. Ray, Sammy, Vera, Lucas, Nina, and me. We have a choice, I said. File legal papers and wait for judges. Or walk onto that stage and tell the whole town what he did. Ray leaned against the workbench. So what's the play, Captain We? Walking in quiet or walking in loud? I picked up the deed to Patterson Shipyard. 14 years. $2.847 million. 47 families who'd trusted us with their grief. We're walking onto that stage, I said. Every document, every receipt, every name. I want the whole town watching when he realizes he's been caught. Sammy grinned. That's the Ralph Long I remember. But Vera's face stayed worried. She pulled me aside as the others began planning. Ralph, she whispered, there's one more thing Rose made me promise to tell you. About why she waited. Why she set the trust to activate only after both your children contested the will. Ice in my chest. What do you mean? Vera looked toward the others. Rose knew Harold would challenge. She was counting on it. The trust was designed to trigger only when the shipyard phone rang. Ancient rotary model on the wall. Hadn't worked in years. We all froze. Lucas moved toward it, hand on his service weapon. It rang again. I stared. That line's been disconnected since 2008. Ray picked up the receiver, listened. His face went white. He held it out to me. It's for you, Ray said. He says his name is Vernon Keene, and he says he's been waiting 14 years for Rose Patterson's ghost to make a mistake. The phone's silence after Keene hung up felt heavier than any words he could have spoken. He knows you're here, Lucas said, his hand still resting on his service weapon. Which means he's already planning his next move. Nina Brooks typed rapidly on her phone. I need to get ahead of this story before he controls the narrative. Can I quote you on record about... Not yet. Vera cut her off, her attorney instincts sharp. We document everything first. Sammy, that recording you mentioned, the one from the night Rose died. Can you retrieve it? Sammy Chen nodded, already moving toward the storage room door. Marine radio logs. Rose made me promise to keep them safe, said they might matter someday. I never understood why, until now. I followed him into the cramped space that smelled of motor oil and salt water. Metal shelves lined the walls, packed with labeled boxes dating back decades. Sammy's hands moved with certainty, pulling down a container, marked 2008 Communications. Rose was meticulous, he said softly, extracting a plastic case containing what looked like old cassette tapes. Every distress call, every weather report. She said a shipyard owner's duty was to protect the water and everyone on it. He found the tape labeled, August 13th, 2008, and carried it back to the office where Vera had produced a small cassette player from her briefcase. Maritime law requires certain records be preserved, she explained, setting up the device. I brought this in case we needed it. The tape hissed with static, then Rose Patterson's voice filled the room, strong, commanding, exactly as I remembered from the photograph on this very desk. Mayday, mayday. This is Rose Patterson, 2 miles north of Patterson Point. Brake failure, complete loss of control. Vehicle approaching cliff edge. The sound of screaming metal, a sickening crunch, then silence that seemed to last forever. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles white. This was the woman who'd tried to save me, who'd built a future I never knew existed. The static continued for what felt like minutes. Then a new voice emerged, and my blood turned to ice. Chief, it's Tom Keene. Listen carefully. Rose Patterson just went off Highway 47. You'll find her vehicle at the cliff base. When you file the report, you write, wet roads, poor visibility, driver error. That's the only story. The brake line investigation gets buried. Are we clear? A mumbled response I couldn't make out. I said, are we clear? Your pension depends on understanding me, Chief. Yes, Mayor, crystal clear. The tape ended. Have you ever heard your own death sentence spoken 20 years after the crime? That's what this was proof, that Mayor Vernon Keene had murdered Rose Patterson and covered it up. The woman who'd tried to give me back my life had died because of that life, because of the shipyard and the land and whatever Keene wanted badly enough to kill for. That's admissible, Lucas said quietly, his cop's mind already building the case. Chain of custody might be challenged, but combined with everything else. Someone's coming. Nina stood at the window, her reporter's instincts alert. Black Mercedes. Same one from the surveillance photos Sammy took last month. Brandon. My son, no. The man who'd stolen my son's name climbed out of the car carrying a briefcase. He moved with the defeated posture of someone who'd already lost, but hadn't accepted it yet. I met him at the pier entrance, blocking his path to the office. Behind me, I felt the others watching through the window. Dad. His voice cracked on the word. Or Ralph, or whoever you're deciding to be today. I know who I am, I said. Question is whether you do. He set down the briefcase and opened it. Stacks of cash filled every inch more money than I'd seen in my entire life on the streets. I mean, $500,000, Brandon said. Cash. Take it and sign the shipyard over to me. Walk away. Start a new life. This is more money than you'll ever need, more than you ever dreamed of having. The shipyard's worth millions. Ray Kowalski told me about the offers you've been getting. I know. Brandon's shoulders sagged. That's exactly why I can't let you have it. Dad, Ralph, you don't understand what you're stepping into. Then explain it. He looked at the water, the setting sun turning everything gold and red. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Mayor Keene came to me in 2010, said he knew about your identity, about Rose's accident, about irregularities and how the power of attorney was filed. Said he could make problems go away or make them destroy us. His price was $8,000 a month. The number hit me like a physical blow. 12 years, Brandon continued. That's $1,152,000 I paid him. I took out a second mortgage, drained the kid's college funds. I'm trapped, and if you push this, he'll destroy all of us. Take the $500,000, please. I thought about the young man who'd visited me in that care facility, who'd called me dad and made promises about family. How much of that person was real? How much was already drowning? But then I thought about Rose Patterson's voice on that tape, calm and professional, even as her brakes failed, even as she faced death. She'd spent her final dollars trying to protect me. I couldn't dishonor that by running now. No, I said, Rose died trying to protect me. I won't spit on her memory by taking blood money. Then you've killed us all. Brandon snapped the briefcase shut and walked back to his Mercedes. I watched him drive away, wondering if I'd just made the right choice or signed all our death warrants. Lucas's phone buzzed. His face went pale as he read the screen. Keene just filed an emergency restraining order. He set his voice tight. Claims you're mentally incompetent and dangerous. Court hearing tomorrow morning at 9. He looked up at me, and I saw fear in a cop's eyes for the first time. If he wins, he can have you institutionalized before you ever testify against him. I couldn't sleep, so I drove to the pier where I died 15 years ago. Lucas and Vera had spent hours preparing for the morning hearing, But around 11:30, I'd walked out of the shipyard office and driven through empty streets to the municipal pier. The water was black glass under a half moon. Cold wind came off the bay, cutting through my jacket. I'd been colder than this before, cold enough to stop breathing. I'd been here before, not just 15 years ago. Every night in my dreams, standing at this railing, trying to remember what the black water had taken from me. Tomorrow, I'd face Keen in front of the whole town at the Founders' Day festival. But tonight, I needed to face whatever happened here, the thing Rose died protecting. 2 memories had already returned. Brandon's visit to Riverside Care in December. Rose sitting across from me in the shipyard office. August 2007, offering back my stolen life. But there was a third memory pressing against my skull, like water pressure trying to break through. Something that happened here. Something worth murdering Rose Patterson to keep hidden. I gripped the cold railing and let my mind drift back. October 2007. I'd been working at Patterson Shipyard for 2 months, living above Ray Kowalski's garage. My identity documents were being processed. For the first time in 3 decades, I'd felt like a real person. Then what? The wind shifted, bringing the smell of motor oil and fish. Exactly like that night. October 14th, 2007. I'd been standing right here, phone in my hand. The memory slammed into me like the water had total black suffocating. I was 37 years younger, phone pressed to my ear. Late evening, around 9 o'clock, I'd witnessed something that afternoon. A black Escalade weaving across the center line on Highway 47, clipping a woman on a bicycle. She'd gone down hard. The Escalade never stopped. But I'd seen the driver, young man, early 20s, clearly drunk, and I'd seen the license plate. Duh. Yes, Greg Keen. I heard myself saying my voice from 15 years ago. The mayor's son, drunk driving hit and run. The family deserves to know who... Footsteps behind me, heavy, purposeful. I'd started to turn. Something hard cracked against the back of my neck. The phone flew from my hand, splashed into the water. I staggered forward. Hands rough, strong, grabbed my legs and lifted. I was falling. The black water rose up to meet me, and then I was under, sinking the cold so intense it felt like fire. I tried to kick upward, but didn't know which way was up. My lungs screamed. I opened my mouth, and salt water rushed in. Down, hands clawing toward moonlight I couldn't reach. This was how I died. I gripped the present-day pier railing, gasping while past me drowned 6 feet from shore. The memory was so vivid, I could taste the salt water, feel the burning in my chest. But I didn't die. What happened? I forced myself back into the memory, past the drowning panic, past the moment my vision started to go dark. A hand grabbed my collar. Not from above, from beside me. Someone in the water with me. A smaller hand, strong grip, yanking hard, pulling me sideways. Rose. She'd followed me to the pier, seen the attack, jumped into October water without hesitation. The memory crystallized. Rose Patterson, 66 years old, dragging me through water that wanted to keep me. My head broke the surface. I coughed, vomited, salt water breathed. She pulled me toward the rocks at the pier's edge. "Breathe, Ralph," she gasped, her voice raw with effort. "Breathe! I've got you. He's gone. You're alive." She hauled me onto the rocks. I lay there coughing while she climbed up beside me, both of us soaked and shaking. Who I managed. "Someone who works for the mayor," she said quietly. "Someone who doesn't want you testifying about what you saw today." She looked at me, and even in the moonlight I could see the decision forming in her eyes. "Ralph, you can't be Ralph Long anymore. If you are, you're dead." I opened my eyes. Still midnight, still January, still alive because she'd refused to let the water take me. She'd jumped into freezing water to save my life with her own hands. Then she'd spent the next year erasing Ralph Long, creating John Mercer, building the trust fund, protecting the shipyard deed, all so I could disappear and survive. Then she'd died for it. "You saved me twice," I said aloud to the empty pier. "Once with your hands, once with your legacy." The cold wind carried my words out over the water where I'd nearly drowned, where Rose had refused to let me drown. Tomorrow I'd face Keen. Not for the shipyard, though it was worth millions. Not for the trust fund, though 47 families depended on it. For Rose Patterson, who'd jumped into black water because one homeless man's life mattered as much as her own. I looked at the dark water one last time and spoke her name aloud. Rose. One word. Enough. Behind me, footsteps on the pier. I turned. A woman stood 20 feet away, arms wrapped around herself against the cold face, wet with tears. Astrid, my youngest daughter, 35 years old, looking exactly like the photographs I'd seen at Brandon's house. Dark hair, her mother's eyes, wearing a coat too thin for January night air. The first time I'd seen her since the will reading. "I heard you," she whispered. "I heard you say her name." She took a step closer and her voice broke. "Dad, don't go to the festival tomorrow. Please. Keen will kill you like he killed her." Ray handed me the uniform at dawn, and I understood this was the last choice I'd ever make as Ralph Long. I'd left Astrid at the pier around 2 in the morning, her plea still ringing in my ears. "Don't go to the festival. Keen will kill you." But I'd looked at her, really, looked at my youngest daughter for the first time in 15 years, and said the only thing I could. Rose jumped into Blackwater to save me. I won't dishonor that by hiding now. Now, 7 hours later, Ray stood in the shipyard office holding a garment bag I recognized. The captain's rescue uniform I'd worn for 6 years before I disappeared. "I washed it the week after you left," Ray said quietly. "Kept it in my closet 15 years. Knew you'd need it someday." The uniform still fit. Navy blue jacket with Patterson Shipyard insignia on the shoulder. White shirt underneath captain's stripes on the cuffs. When I looked in the cracked mirror on the office wall, I barely recognized the man staring back. 68 years old face weathered by streets and weather, but wearing the uniform that meant something once. Vera watched from the doorway, her lawyer's composure cracking slightly. "Rose would be proud," she said. "Harold would too if he could see past his fear." "Harold's afraid because he's smart," I said, adjusting the collar. "Keen's dangerous. We all know that now. Which is why you're not going alone." Lucas Reed entered, carrying a tactical vest. "Keen's got private security at the festival. Stay close to me once you're on that stage." Sammy and Nina arrived with equipment cases, cameras, portable speakers, the evidence files we'd compiled. Everything we needed to turn a town festival into a public trial. "Trucks are loaded," Sammy said. "Festival starts at noon. Keen's scheduled to speak at 2. Then we arrive at 1:30, Vera said, slipping into her attorney voice. "Ralph stays back until Keen commits himself publicly. The more witnesses, the better." I touched the captain's insignia on my shoulder. Rose had given me this uniform in 2005 when I had finally earned my maritime certification. Said I'd saved enough lives to wear it proudly. Now I'd wear it one last time to save hers. Bayside Town Square was packed. Over 2,000 people filled the festival grounds, families with children, elderly residents, vendors selling fried food and local crafts. A massive stage dominated the square, flanked by speakers and a projection screen. Banners read Founders Day 2022 and celebrating 150 years. I stood at the back of the crowd in my captain's uniform, invisible among the masses. Vera, Lucas, and Nina had positioned themselves strategically. Sammy waited by the technical booth, ready to hijack the festival's audio-visual system. At exactly 2 o'clock, Mayor Vernon Keene climbed the stage stairs to thunderous applause. He looked the same as his photograph, 63 years old, silver hair, expensive suit, politician's smile that didn't reach his eyes. A man who'd built a career on Rose Patterson's corpse. "Welcome, Bayside." His voice boomed through the speakers. "Today we celebrate our past and embrace our future. And what a future it is." The crowd cheered. "I'm thrilled to announce that Bayside has been selected for a landmark development, Blackwater Bay Resort. $40 million in investment, 300 new jobs. A destination that will put our town on the map." More applause. I watched faces light up with hope. Jobs, economic growth, the promise of prosperity. This project wouldn't be possible without one man's extraordinary generosity. Please welcome Brandon Long, whose family has donated the Patterson Shipyard property, who has donated the Patterson Shipyard property to make this dream a reality. Brandon climbed onto the stage beside Keene. My son, the man who'd stolen my identity and sold my mother's legacy, stood there accepting applause while the mayor wrapped an arm around his shoulders. Brandon has asked that this development honor his family's memory. Rose Patterson Long spent her life saving people from this bay. Now her legacy will bring prosperity to the families she served. I stood at the edge of the crowd in my captain's uniform and watched my son lie about his grandmother's legacy. This was the moment Rose had prepared me for. This was why she died. Brandon took the microphone, his voice tight. "My mother loved this town. She loved the water. I know she'd be proud to see her shipyard become something that helps so many people. The crowd erupted in applause. I raised my hand and spoke, my voice cutting through the noise. I have something to say about my mother. The square went quiet. Heads turned. People stepped aside, creating a path. Since my son forgot to mention I'm still alive, I walked forward through the crowd. Older residents gasped, their hands flying to their mouths. That's Ralph Long," someone whispered. "That's the captain. He's wearing his rescue uniform." "Ralph Long is dead," another voice said. "He disappeared in 2007. I'm looking right at him." I climbed the stage stairs. Brandon's face went white. Keen's smile froze. Lucas appeared at the stage edge, hand resting on his service weapon. Nina's cameras started rolling. I took the microphone from Brandon's limp hand. "My name is Ralph Long. 15 years ago, Mayor Vernon Keene had my wife murdered to steal this shipyard. Today I'm going to prove it." Sammy hit the switch. The festival's projection screen lit up with video footage Brandon entering my room at Riverside Care, the assault, the forged documents. Then Vera's evidence files, the trust fund papers, the shipyard deed, the letters threatening Rose. Then the radio recording. The festival speakers crackled to life. Rose's voice strong and commanding, "Mayday, mayday! This is Rose Patterson, 2 miles north of Patterson Point. Brake failure, complete loss of control." The sound of metal crunching. Silence. Then Mayor Keene's voice crystal clear. "Chief, it's Tom Keene. Rose Patterson just went off Highway 47. You write, wet roads, poor visibility driver error. The brake line investigation gets buried. Are we clear?" 2,000 people heard it. No one moved. No one breathed. The recording ended. The crowd erupted, not applause, but rage, a roar that shook the festival stage. Mayor Keene grabbed for the microphone, but Lucas Reed stepped forward, hand on his service weapon. "Vernon Keene," Lucas said into the sudden silence, "you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 15 other charges the state attorney is filing as we speak." Keene's face went white. Then he ran. Mayor Keene made it 6 feet before Ray Kowalski's fist stopped him cold. The crowd had parted when Lucas announced the arrest, creating a clear path toward the parking lot. Keene ran silver hair, flying expensive suit jacket flapping, but Ray stepped into his path and threw a punch that connected with the mayor's jaw, with a sound like a door slamming. Keene went down hard. Ray landed on top of him, pinning him to the asphalt with one knee pressed between his shoulder blades. "This is for Rose Patterson," Ray said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear, "and for every family you robbed in this town." 2 Massachusetts State Police cruisers pulled into the festival grounds, lights flashing. Lucas jogged over with his handcuffs already out. "Vernon Keene," Lucas said, reading from a warrant in his other hand, "you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud, and accessory to vehicular homicide in the 2008 death of Rose Patterson." Keene struggled under Ray's weight. "You can't prove any of this. That radio tape is inadmissible. My lawyers will—" "Your lawyers already left," Lucas said, snapping the cuffs on. "State attorney got to them first. Offered immunity in exchange for testimony about your property theft schemes. Turns out you've been doing this for 20 years, not just to Rose. They took the deal an hour ago." Keene's face went from red to white. Ray stepped back, and Lucas hauled the mayor to his feet. The crowd pressed in, not threatening, but witnessing. Faces I didn't know, people whose lives Keene had touched with his corruption. They watched in silence as the state police led him toward their cruiser. I stood at the edge of the stage, my captain's uniform suddenly feeling heavier than it had that morning. Justice was supposed to feel triumphant. Instead, it felt like watching a building collapse necessary, but leaving rubble that someone would have to clean up. Movement on the stage caught my eye. A woman climbed the stairs, hands, trembling face streaked with tears. Early 40s, dark blonde hair, wearing a cardigan that looked too warm for the afternoon sun. She walked to the microphone Brandon had abandoned. "I need to say something," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "My name is Claire Long. I'm Brandon's wife." The crowd, which had started to murmur and shift, went quiet again. 3 weeks ago, my husband showed me a letter that said his father was dead, except his father was standing in our kitchen. I climbed back onto the stage, standing 10 feet from my daughter-in-law. I'd seen her in photographs at Brandon's house, but never met her. Never knew she existed until I showed up and destroyed her life. "Brandon asked me to stay quiet," Claire continued. "Said it was complicated. said Ralph had abandoned the family and didn't deserve the inheritance. I believed him because I was scared of what the truth would cost us. She looked at me then, and I saw the same guilt I'd seen in Brandon's eyes on the pier when he'd offered me that briefcase full of cash. I signed the nursing home commitment papers, she said. Brandon told me his father had dementia, that it was best for everyone. I signed them without asking questions because I didn't want to know the answers. I watched my daughter-in-law confess on the same stage where my son had just lied to 2,000 people. This was what family betrayal looked like when you forced it into daylight. This morning, Claire said, her voice breaking, Vera Patterson came to my house. She played me a cassette Rose made before she died. Rose said my name. She said, Claire, if you hear this, don't let your silence kill your father again. I can't be silent anymore. She stepped back from the microphone and looked at me. I nodded once. Not forgiveness, I wasn't there yet, but acknowledgement. She'd done what Brandon couldn't. Lucas climbed onto the stage, another warrant in his hand. Brandon Long, he said, walking toward where my son stood, frozen near the projection screen. You're under arrest for assault, forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted theft of a protected trust. Brandon didn't run, didn't fight, just held out his hands for the cuffs. I walked over to him. Up close, I could see how exhausted he looked. Deep circles under his eyes, hair graying at the temples, the hollowed-out expression of someone who'd been drowning for so long. They'd forgotten what breathing felt like. I'm sorry, Brandon said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Dad. I thought if I could just make one deal work, I could pay Keen back and we'd all be free. How many years had Brandon carried this 12 years of payments? 12 years of fear, 12 years of sinking deeper while pretending he was swimming toward shore. You were never going to be free, Brandon, I said. Not by feeding the man who killed your grandmother. Your mother knew that. That's why she built the trust, not to punish you, to save you. I know, Brandon said. I know that now. Lucas led him down the stage stairs. Claire followed, sobbing into her hands. The crowd began to disperse, some angry, some satisfied, some just confused by everything they'd witnessed. Nina Brooks packed up her camera equipment. Ray and Sammy stood together, talking quietly. Justice served. Truth exposed. 15 years of lies finally brought into daylight. I stood alone on the festival stage in my captain's uniform, surrounded by evidence of my mother's murder and my family's destruction. Then I saw them at the edge of the crowd. Astrid stood beside Harold, my 2 children, who hadn't spoken in a decade together. Harold looked older than his 39 years, his lawyer's suit, rumpled glasses catching the afternoon sun. Astrid had changed from her midnight pier clothes into jeans and a jacket. Astrid met my eyes and started walking toward the stage. 2 days after the festival, Claire sat alone on the bayfront bench where tourists used to feed gulls, and I knew I had to choose between justice and mercy. Astrid had reached me on that stage, Harold following behind her. We'd talked stilted, careful words exchanged while the crowd finished dispersing around us. Astrid apologized for the midnight warning that came too late, for believing Brandon's lies for too long. Harold stayed silent, his lawyer's mind clearly still processing everything he'd witnessed. We'd agreed to meet again to try rebuilding what betrayal had shattered, but that conversation felt unfinished, suspended in the space between intention and healing. Now 48 hours later, the town square had emptied of festival decorations, leaving behind crushed programs and questions nobody could answer. Lucas found me at the shipyard that morning, coffee in hand, exhaustion written across his face. State attorney filed 14 charges against Keen, he said, leaning against the pier railing. Obstruction, conspiracy, accessory to vehicular homicide fraud. The works. Brandon's lawyer is negotiating a plea deal, probably 3 to 5 years with restitution. And Astrid? Lucas shook his head. No criminal charges, but that video from the will reading, the one where she pretended to care while planning to contest someone, leaked it online. It's everywhere. The town's not forgetting. Vera arrived an hour later with legal documents requiring signatures, trust transfers, property deeds, official acknowledgments that I was in fact alive and legally entitled to everything Rose had built. Claire's been sitting on the bayfront bench since dawn, Vera said quietly, glancing out the office window toward the water. Won't talk to anyone. The whole town knows she signed those nursing home commitment papers. They're calling her a traitor, same as Brandon. I followed her gaze across the bay to where a lone figure sat hunched on the bench, staring at the water. She's not the same as Brandon, I said. She broke? He never did? I walked to the bayfront an hour before noon. Claire didn't look up as I approached, just kept staring at the gray water, where fishing boats bobbed against their moorings. Up close, I could see she hadn't slept dark circles under her eyes. Hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing the same cardigan from the festival. May I sit? I asked. She flinched, started to stand. I should go. Please, stay. She sat back down slowly, hands twisted together in her lap. I settled onto the bench beside her, leaving space between us. The wood was cold through my jacket, the morning air sharp with salt and approaching winter. We sat in silence for a long time. A gull landed near our feet, looked for food, flew away disappointed. I should have stopped him, Claire finally said, her voice barely audible over the water. When Brandon showed me that letter when he said you were dead, I knew something was wrong. But he's my husband, and I was scared. Scared of what? Scared we'd lose everything. She looked at her hands. Scared the town would find out Brandon owed money to Keene. Scared of what it meant that you'd been gone 15 years and never called. Scared you didn't want to be found. I didn't know I was lost, I said. For most of those years, I was John Mercer, a man with no past and no future, just surviving. Brandon said you abandoned the family, left Mom to raise 3 kids alone. He made it sound like you were a coward who ran away from responsibility. I did leave, I admitted, but not by choice. Someone threw me into the bay to stop me from testifying. Rose pulled me out and gave me a new identity to keep me alive. I didn't remember any of that until a month ago. Claire turned to look at me for the first time, and I saw tears on her face. I signed those nursing home papers, she whispered. Brandon said you had dementia, that you were dangerous to yourself. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because believing him was easier than asking questions I didn't want answered. My daughter-in-law sat on the bench where Rose used to watch ships come home, and I realized forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about deciding which parts of the past got to sail into the future. Rose left you a cassette tape, I said. Vera played it for you. Claire nodded, fresh tears spilling over. She said my name. Said, Claire, if you hear this, don't let your silence kill your father again. That's when I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore, even if it meant losing everything. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the photograph I'd been carrying since Vera first showed it to me. Rose at the shipyard in 2006, smiling at the camera, the bay behind her catching afternoon light. Your mother-in-law never hated you, Claire, I said, handing her the photo. She only wanted you to be strong enough to do the right thing. On that stage, in front of 2,000 people, you did it. Claire took the photo with shaking hands, stared at Rose's face like she was seeing it for the first time. I destroyed our family, she said. Brandon's going to prison. Astrid won't talk to me. You have every right to hate all of us. I'm 68 years old, I said. I've been dead for 15 years, and I've spent the last month learning how my mother built an army to bring me back to life. I don't have time to hate anyone. I only have time to finish what Rose started. Claire held Rose's photo like a lifeline, and I understood why my mother had recorded those cassette tapes. Not to manipulate, to save, to give her family one last chance to choose the people they wanted to be. She wiped her eyes and looked across the bay toward the shipyard. What will you do with it? She asked. I followed her gaze to the property Rose had died protecting the trust fund from 47 families, the 14 acres of waterfront that had cost so much blood. Your mother-in-law left instructions, I said. Plans for a maritime rescue training center, a memorial, a place that saves people instead of just remembering them. She drew up the blueprints in 2007 month before I disappeared. The bank manager slid the trust documents across her desk and asked me to prove I was alive. 3 days after the festival, Vera and I sat in Bayside Community Bank facing Margaret Holloway, a woman in her early 50s with reading glasses on a chain, and the careful manner of someone who'd spent decades handling other people's life savings. Mr. Long, she said, comparing my face to a photograph from 2007. This trust was established in June 2008 with very specific activation conditions. You needed to be declared legally dead, then proven alive, and your heirs had to contest ownership. She looked up at me over her glasses. All 3 conditions have now been met. I pressed my thumb to the fingerprint scanner she'd produced. It beeped green. Rose Patterson predicted her own children would betray me. I said the reality of it still settling in my chest like cold water. She built a trap 14 years before they walked into it. She built insurance, Vera corrected gently. She hoped they'd prove her wrong, but she made sure you'd be protected if they didn't. Margaret pulled up files on her computer numbers and legal descriptions. I'd already memorized from Vera's briefings. Patterson Shipyard deed for 14 acres of bayfront property. Block 47 parcel. 12A. The memorial fund containing contributions from 47 families established at $2.5 million. With 15 years of compound interest, the current balance is $2,847,312. I stared at the number on the screen. Each dollar represented someone's child pulled from the bay, someone's parent rescued from a capsized boat, someone's life that Rose Patterson had considered worth saving. My husband Harold used to say Rose had a mind for strategy. Vera said, watching me sign the transfer documents. If he could see this, he'd say you signed 15 years late, but right on time. I signed my name Ralph Long, not John Mercer, and felt the weight of 47 families settle onto my shoulders. I want to withdraw $200, I told Margaret. For materials. The rest stays in the fund until I know every name of every family who contributed. Not just numbers. Names. Rose kept records, Vera said. Letters from each family. I have them at my office. Margaret processed the withdrawal, counted out 10 $20 bills, slid them across the desk. It was the first money I'd touched in 15 years that was truly mine. That afternoon, I drove to Kowalski's Marine Supply. Ray's shop sat at the north end of the bay, a weathered building that smelled like rope and motor oil and 30 years of maritime commerce. He was in the back office when I arrived, pouring coffee from a pot that looked older than both of us. 15 years you've been gone, Ray said, handing me a chipped mug. 4 weeks you've been back. Feels like we've lived 3 lifetimes in a month. We sat in Ray's office and drank coffee that tasted like every conversation we'd had for 30 years. Bitter, strong, honest. Some friendships don't need words. They just need to survive. When I left in 2007, I said, staring at the coffee, I thought I was protecting my family by disappearing. Turns out Rose was protecting all of us by making sure I'd come back. She knew you better than you knew yourself, Ray said. Always did. January light filtered through salt-stained windows, turning the dust motes into tiny stars. Outside the bay was quiet winter's slow season. Few boats moving water gray as slate. The training center, Ray said. You're really going through with it. Rose drew up blueprints in 2007. Detailed plans for converting the shipyard into a maritime rescue training facility. Classroom simulation equipment. Boat maintenance bays. A memorial wall with the names of everyone she saved. Sounds expensive? That's what the trust fund is for. Rose spent 15 years planning this. I'm just the one who gets to build it. Ray nodded, went quiet for a long moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a stack of faded receipts, slid them across the desk. Bayside Florist, dated August 14th. 1 receipt for each year from 2009 to 2022. I don't understand, I said. August 14th, Ray said quietly. Anniversary of Rose's death. Every year since 2009, I've been placing flowers at the Patterson Shipyard gate. White roses because those were her favorites. I'd go at dawn before the town woke up, leave them by the gate, say a few words. My throat tightened. 14 years. You did that for 14 years. I did it because she saved my son in 2004 when his boat capsized, Ray said. I did it because you were my best friend, and I thought you were dead. I did it because someone needed to remember what she built. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much water and weather. And I thought maybe someday you'd come back, and I could tell you. I kept watch while you were gone. Ray kept receipts for flowers he bought in my absence in Rose's memory for 14 years. That's what love looks like when it has nowhere to go except toward the dead and the missing. This August, I said, my voice rough. Will you? Yeah, Ray said. We'll go together. I looked at my oldest friend across the desk, scattered with 14 years of flower receipts, and understood what Rose had been building. Not revenge, not even justice. A community that remembered what mattered. Ray stood, walked to the shop's small fridge, pulled out 2 beers, handed me one. To Rose, he said, raising his bottle. And to August, I answered. When we'll place flowers together? We drank. The beer was cold and tasted like salt air and friendship that had survived everything time could throw at it. Through the salt-stained window, I could see the shipyard. Across the bay, Rose's shipyard. My shipyard, now waiting to become what she'd always intended. A place that saved people. A place that remembered. A legacy measured not in dollars, but in lives that mattered enough to fight for. 3 weeks after the festival, we gathered at the shipyard gate to read my wife's name in bronze, and I realized revenge had never been the point. The work had moved faster than anyone expected. Ray Kowalski coordinated construction crews who showed up before dawn. Each morning, men who worked without complaint in February cold. Because they'd known Rose or known someone she'd saved, or simply heard enough of the story to understand what this building was supposed to become. Sammy handled the electrical and communication systems with the focused quiet of someone who understood that getting things right mattered more than getting them done fast. Vera managed permits and legal paperwork from her kitchen table, filing documents at midnight and appearing at the shipyard by 7 with coffee and updates. Claire had taken Rose's rescue logs and begun organizing them into actual curriculum. Real emergencies, real outcomes, real lessons that students would carry on to the water someday. The training center wasn't finished. Months of work remained. But the memorial plaque was ready, and some things couldn't wait for perfect conditions. February 9th, 2022. Clear, cold morning, the kind of winter day that feels like an apology for everything January did wrong. The sun came up slowly over the eastern bay, turning the water into hammered silver, throwing long shadows across the shipyard's freshly repaired exterior. Someone had painted the front wall. I didn't know who. I'd arrived at dawn to find it done, the weathered gray replaced with clean white, the Patterson Shipyard name restored in dark letters above the entrance. The bronze plaque gleamed at the gate mounted on a slab of granite salvaged from the original pier foundation. Vera had insisted on that detail, that the stone underneath Rose's name should come from the same pier where this story had started and nearly ended. Rose Patterson Long Memorial, Rescue Training Center. In memory of Rose Patterson Long, who kept the truth alive so others could find their way home. Below her name, 47 family names arranged in 2 columns, each one engraved with the same care as hers. The Kowalskis, the Delgados, the O'Briens, the Vasquez family, the Tanners, 38 other names I'd spent the past 3 weeks learning. Reading the letters Rose had collected, understanding who these people were, and what that night in November had cost them, and what Rose had convinced them to invest in instead of grief. All the families Rose had reached out to after the shipwreck. All the people who'd given what they could to a trust fund for a man they'd never met, because Rose Patterson had sat across from them at kitchen tables and explained that their survival meant something, and that something needed protecting. Over 100 people showed up for the unveiling on a cold February morning when they could have stayed home. Ray stood beside me in a dark suit he'd probably worn to funerals, his face carrying the particular expression of a man who'd been waiting a long time for a moment and now didn't quite know what to do with it. Sammy stood nearby with his wife and 2 grandchildren, the younger one asleep against his shoulder despite the cold. Vera had taken Harold's arm, my eldest son standing straight in his lawyer's coat, looking uncomfortable, but present. He hadn't forgiven me yet. I hadn't asked him to. But he'd chosen to be here to witness, to stand in the cold, and let this moment matter. That was enough for now. Claire stood closest to the plaque itself, one hand resting lightly against the bronze letters of Rose's name. The way you touch something you're still not sure is real. Lucas Reed attended in full-dress uniform, his deputy police chief badge catching the morning light. He stood slightly apart from the crowd, the way law enforcement always does at public events, watchful and quiet. Nina Brooks was there with her camera and notepad, filming everything for the Bayside Chronicle's permanent record, because she'd decided this story deserved documentation that would outlast the news cycle. And at the very back of the crowd, half hidden behind a cluster of older residents I didn't recognize, stood Astrid. My youngest daughter hadn't called, hadn't written, hadn't appeared at the shipyard in the 3 weeks since the festival. I'd wondered sometimes, standing at the office window in the early mornings, whether she'd left Bayside entirely, whether the weight of everything that had happened would push her towards somewhere that didn't know her name. But there she was, dark coat hands in her pockets, standing completely still, while everyone around her moved and talked and pointed at the plaque. She didn't approach, didn't speak, didn't try to catch my eye, just stood there in the cold watching as if witnessing was the only thing she was capable of offering, and she'd decided it was better than nothing. Maybe it was. Vera stepped forward to place white roses at the base of the plaque. 3 stems carefully chosen the same flowers. Ray had been leaving at this gate every August for 14 years when he thought Rose's husband was dead and gone. The crowd quieted without being asked. Rose would say, "This isn't a memorial," Vera told the gathered crowd. Her voice was steady despite the tears on her face, the attorney's composure holding even when everything underneath it was breaking. She'd say a memorial is for people who are finished. Rose was never finished. She built this place, she built this fund, she built the case that brought Ralph home, and she did all of it after she was supposed to be beaten, after the mayor had threatened her, after the doctors told her Ralph would never remember. Vera paused, looked at the plaque. She wasn't building a memorial. She was building a promise to keep saving people the way she always did for as long as this bay needs us. Ray stepped forward next. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket, the list of 47 names printed in clean type organized by year. He read them aloud one by one without rushing, each name given its full weight, each name a complete sentence. A life saved, a family kept whole, a moment when Rose Patterson had looked at dark water and decided that drowning was not an acceptable outcome, and death could be interrupted if someone was willing to move fast enough. The reading took 11 minutes. Nobody moved. Nobody coughed or shifted or checked a phone. The cold didn't seem to matter. 47 families, Ray said when he'd finished. His voice was rough but controlled. 47 names she made sure would be remembered, and 1 name she made sure would come home. He folded the paper carefully and put it back in his pocket. She never stopped believing he would. Not for a single day in 14 years. I stepped forward, faced the crowd, looked at faces I half recognized, faces I didn't know, at all faces that had watched me walk onto a festival stage 3 weeks ago and say things that changed this town in ways we were all still measuring. Some of these people had known me before I disappeared, had worked on the water with me or bought rope from Ray's shop or watched their children grow up around the shipyard. Most hadn't. Most only knew the story of the captain who'd saved 47 people and vanished the wife who'd spent a year trying to prove what happened, the mayor who'd built a career on her grave. But they all knew Rose. That was the constant. That was the thing nobody had been able to erase. "My wife didn't build this place for revenge," I said. The words came out steady, which surprised me. I'd been afraid they wouldn't. She could have. She had every reason to. They tried to kill me, and when that didn't work, they tried to bury me alive inside my own broken memory. They threatened her. They followed her. And eventually they killed her for knowing too much and refusing to pretend otherwise. I looked at the plaque, at her name in bronze, at the 47 names below hers. But she didn't spend her last year building a weapon. She built a school. She built a fund. She left cassette tapes and hidden boxes and a wedding ring behind a map and a note that said, "You'll know what to do when you remember who you are." I stopped, let that settle. She was right. The only legacy that matters is the next person pulled from the water. That's what she understood. That's what this place is for. The crowd dispersed slowly through the late morning people stopping at the plaque to read names, to remember to stand in the cold and let the weight of it find them. I watched Astrid slip away through the edge of the crowd, without a word, without looking back. But she'd been there. She'd stood in the February cold for 45 minutes, when she could have stayed wherever she was hiding. She'd witnessed. That was something. Maybe the beginning of something. I didn't know yet. That evening I stood at the office window and watched the lights of the converted workshop glow warm against the February darkness. Claire and Sammy were inside preparing for Monday's first training class. 12 students enrolled, Coast Guard partnership, confirmed state maritime certification approved, after Lucas had personally walked the paperwork through 3 different offices. Rose's training center wasn't a dream or a plan or a promise anymore. It was operational. It would open on Monday morning and someone would learn something that might save a life someday, and Rose would be the reason that happened. Claire moved between shelves of organized logs, Rose's handwriting visible on labels and dividers. Real emergencies documented over 10 years. Real outcomes. Real lessons written down by a woman who'd understood that what you know is only useful if you pass it on. These records go back to 1998. Claire called across the yard, not knowing I was watching through the window. She documented everything, every call, every rescue, every family. A pause. She knew exactly what she was building. She just didn't know who would finish it. Sammy installed the new marine radio in the corner mount he'd built earlier that week. Newer equipment than what had recorded the mayor's voice all those years ago, but serving the same purpose: communication, connection, the difference between someone drowning and someone being found. I climbed to the shipyard roof as the last light left the sky. The metal ladder was cold under my hands, each rung familiar in a way I couldn't fully explain the roof. Tar rough under my boots. The smell hit me at the top, salt and diesel, and the particular scent of water that holds on to everything and forgets nothing. I took out 2 photographs. Rose at the shipyard in 2006, smiling at the camera with the bay behind her, the building freshly painted behind her shoulders. And the rescue team photo from 2005 me, in the captain's uniform, 6 of us standing together, believing we understood what rescue meant and why it mattered and what it would cost. I placed them side by side on the roof ledge and looked at them in the last of the February light. 2 people who thought rescue was simple. Pull drowning people from Blackwater. Act fast. Don't hesitate. Be brave enough and strong enough and present enough when it counts. We had been so wrong about the hard part. Rescue was building something so solid that 14 years of lies and money and political power couldn't sink it. Rescue was recording your own voice onto cassette tape, knowing you might not be alive to play it. Rescue was trusting Ray Kowalski to keep a secret for 15 years without being asked to explain why. Rescue was 47 families writing checks to a trust fund for a stranger because one woman had looked them in the eye and made them understand their survival carried responsibility. Rescue was Rose jumping into October water without hesitation to pull me from a bay that wanted to keep me. How many nights had I stood on other rooftops in other cities, staring at water that wasn't this water, wondering what home felt like and whether I'd ever had one? How many mornings had I walked away from shelters in towns I didn't know, carrying everything I owned in bags that got lighter and heavier, depending on the weather and my luck. All those years home was here, not waiting for me to find it, waiting for me to remember it. There's a difference. Finding implies something was lost, but this place had never moved. It had been here the entire time, keeping the lights off, keeping the secrets, keeping the 47 names safe in a tin box, behind a loose board, keeping Rose's voice preserved on magnetic tape, inside a gray metal box, under a table, keeping the truth exactly as she'd left it. For the day I finally came back and was ready to carry it forward. Below me the workshop glowed. Claire appeared in the doorway, looked up, saw me standing on the roof in the cold. She raised her hand. I raised mine. We stayed like that for a moment, the woman who'd signed papers to erase me standing in the doorway of the school my wife had built, ready to teach what Rose had spent a lifetime learning. My son Brandon was serving 3 years for fraud in a minimum security facility 2 hours north. He wrote letters that Claire brought to the shipyard on her days off. The apologies in those letters were real. I could tell the difference now between performance and genuine reckoning. But apologies take longer to mean something than letters take to write. We had time. Not unlimited time, but enough. My daughter Astrid was somewhere in Bayside, not yet ready to knock on the shipyard door, but no longer recording her grief for strangers. That was movement. Slow movement, but movement. My son Harold was choosing presence, showing up when he could have stayed away, standing at the back of crowds when he could have driven to another city, and pretended none of this had happened to his family. The forgiveness would come or it wouldn't, but the presence was real. My wife Rose had been dead 14 years and was still pulling people from the water, still teaching, still building, still leaving notes in hidden places for the people who needed them most. I looked at her photograph one more time in the fading February light, smiling at the camera in 2006, the bay shining behind her, the building solid at her back. She had known. She had always known. Not that everything would work out. Not that justice was guaranteed, or that truth would automatically rise above the weight of money and power trying to hold it under. But she had known that the right foundation built carefully enough, by enough people who refused to forget, could outlast almost anything thrown against it. I had spent a month believing I needed to find my life, track down the missing pieces, recover what had been stolen, but you cannot find what was never truly lost. My life had not been waiting to be found. My life had been waiting for me to remember, waiting here in the salt wind and the bay's long memory, waiting in 47 families who'd kept faith with a woman's promise, waiting in Ray's flower receipts and Vera's locked files and a cassette tape that preserved a voice across 14 years of silence, waiting in a shipyard that had stood empty and patient and full of everything I needed for exactly as long as it took me to come home. I couldn't find my life. My life had waited for me to remember, and now standing on this roof with Rose's photograph in my hand, and the workshop lights burning warm below me, and the bay stretching out dark and endless and familiar in every direction, I finally did. And to you, listening to my story, remember this. When family betrayal strikes, revenge isn't what you think it is. Looking back, I spent 15 years running from a life I couldn't remember. My mistake was believing I had nothing worth fighting for. When my children pushed me into that December snow, I could have walked away and stayed dead. Part of me wanted to, but Rose taught me that real revenge isn't about destruction, it's about building something that outlasts betrayal. That's the lesson every dad facing family revenge should understand. If you're experiencing family betrayal right now, hear me. True revenge comes from rising above it. My family's betrayal nearly destroyed me, but God's timing brought me back when Rose's plan could work. The shipyard they tried to steal became a rescue training center. That's how a dad gets revenge on family who betrayed him, not by tearing them down, but by building something they can never touch. When betrayal cuts deep, build higher than the pain. I want to hear your story. Have you faced family betrayal? How did you handle it? Drop a comment below. Your experience might help someone else find strength. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs hope. And subscribe to Dad's Sweet Revenge for more stories about turning family betrayal into powerful revenge through legacy. Thank you for staying until the very end. This story includes fictionalized elements for storytelling purposes, but the message about family betrayal and redemption is real. May you find your own path to peace.